Hello everyone. Back again with film recaps. In this video, I'm going to recap one of the thriller survival films from 2022, titled Millie. Before we get to the storyline, I'd like to wish everyone a happy and great day. Without further ado, let's get straight to the storyline. The movie opens with our protagonist, Millie, a 24-year-old graduate in nursing. Millie lives with her father, Niranjan, and spends her free time practicing her English, as she wants to move to Canada and start a new life. Niranjan isn't happy about her decision to leave, but Millie refuses to change her mind, because the salary in her country is barely enough to survive. One morning, while Niranjan is driving Millie, she gets a missed call from someone. When her dad asks who it is, she casually says it's from her friend Samira. Niranjan doesn't think much of it, and soon drops her off at her IELTS class. After her classes, Millie heads to a mall, where an auto driver catcalls her outside, but she brushes him off, and soon arrives at her workplace, which is a restaurant called Dune's Kitchen. She begins working diligently, but throughout the day, her phone keeps buzzing with calls from Samira, which she deliberately ignores. At one point, Millie receives a call on the restaurant phone from a man who apologizes and asks for another chance, but she hangs up, and informs her colleague, Hasleen, that it's her boyfriend, Samir, whom she's furious with for missing an important interview. In the evening, as Millie arrives at a theater to watch a movie with her dad, she gets a call from Samira, and then she realizes her boyfriend's sitting right next to her, and he's the one under the name Samira. He once again apologizes to her, and she begins to panic, since her dad doesn't know about their relationship. In the end, Millie is melted by his charming words, and ends up forgiving him. In the following days, Millie continues her usual routine of hanging out with Samir, working at the mall, and practicing English in her free time. She eventually takes her IELTS exam, and scores well, which fills her with excitement. She then begins the process of applying to Canada, but her father remains unhappy, and Samir doesn't seem pleased either. One day, while Millie is at work, she gets a call from Samir, who gives the exciting news that he has finally got a job. Millie is thrilled, and Samir reveals that the job is in Delhi, but he wants to stay here until she moves to Canada. However, she urges him not to let such a great opportunity slip away. Afterward, Millie leaves early from work, after which she meets Samir and the two head to a temple. She then shares her plan to talk to her dad about their marriage, as she was just waiting for him to get a job, which excites him. Later, as the couple is heading home, they're stopped by police for not wearing helmets while riding the bike. Samir speaks with an officer, Satish, and explains that he was just dropping off his girlfriend. But Satish smells alcohol on him, and upon testing, it's confirmed that he had been drinking. Satish decides to arrest him, and asks for Millie's dad's number so he can pick her up. A terrified Samir pleads not to involve her dad, but the officer refuses and takes both of them to the station. Not long after, Niranjan arrives at the station, and is deeply disappointed to see his daughter in such a situation. Satish informs him of the young couple's relationship, and goes on to harshly badmouth Samir. Finally, he allows Niranjan to take Millie, but the tension lingers between the father and daughter. On the way, they don't exchange a single word, and even upon returning, Niranjan refuses to speak to his daughter. The next day, the father and daughter arrive to book Millie's flight to Canada, and Niranjan insists that the staff secure the earliest ticket possible. He later drops Millie at her workplace and walks away without uttering a single word. Throughout the day, Millie's phone continues to ring with calls from Samir, which she ignores. But he soon arrives at the restaurant and requests to talk, as he's leaving tonight for Delhi. Millie remains professional and asks for his order, but he continues insisting on just a 2-minute conversation. When Sudhir notices this, he begins insulting Millie, and tells her to keep her personal problems out of work, so an enraged Sudhir places an order to shut him up, but leaves without eating anything. That night, it's closing time, but Millie is still at the restaurant and is reluctant to go home, because her father is still upset. Meanwhile, Sudhir is outside, talking on the phone when a supply order arrives. He then notices 2 employees, Ladu and Vipul, leaving, so he yells at them to put the boxes in the freezer first. The duo reluctantly agrees, and we see Millie punching out on the system before leaving for home, but the boys beg her to put the boxes in the freezer since they're running late for something. Millie reluctantly agrees, and Ladu, who had forgotten to punch out earlier, quickly does so before leaving. Later, Millie is putting the boxes inside, when Sudhir passes by the freezer and notices the door open. He assumes the two boys have been negligent and immediately shuts the door before locking it. Then he turns off all the lights, and checks the attendance sheet, which shows that all the employees have punched out and left. Unbeknownst to him, Millie is still inside, and packing the food that had fallen to the ground. As he switches off more lights, the freezer also plunges into darkness, leaving Millie trapped and horrified. She realizes what happened, but realizes she's too late. She turns on the lights back and starts screaming for help, but to no avail. And so, Millie searches for her phone, but is terrified to realize that she left it on the table outside. No one can hear her, and Sudhir also eventually leaves the building. Afterward, Millie frantically tries to break down the door using heavy metal items, but it's useless. Samir, on the other hand, is about to leave for Delhi and calls her repeatedly, but she doesn't answer. Elsewhere, Hasleen receives a call from Niranjan, who is worried that his daughter still hasn't returned home. A shocked Hasleen immediately calls Vipul, who reveals that Millie and the manager were still at the restaurant when they left. Hasleen then calls Sudhir and asks about Millie, to which he responds that she punched out before him. Annoyed, he claims he doesn't know or care where the employees go after work. Hasleen then calls Niranjan and lets him know that Millie has already left work. The father grows increasingly anxious and confused about his daughter's whereabouts. He tries calling her multiple times, but doesn't notice the phone ringing in the distance, as it's on silent. Back in the freezer, the temperature has dropped to minus 12.5 degrees Celsius, and Millie frantically rubs her hands together to warm herself. She soon finds a movie ticket in her pocket, and realizes that the last movie of the night normally ends around this time. Elsewhere, we see that Samir has finally boarded the bus to Delhi with a heavy heart. Meanwhile, in the mall, the movie finally ends, and people start leaving the theater. Millie realizes it's the perfect timing, and starts banging the freezer door with a tray, while desperately screaming for help. Unfortunately, no one notices her pleas for help, except a child who hears something. He immediately informs his father, but just then, a discouraged Millie stops banging on the door, so the man doesn't hear anything. After everyone leaves, the mall shuts down, and the thermostat inside the freezer now shows minus 13 degrees Celsius. Millie's face has started to redden, and blood trickles from her nose. Even worse, the temperature later drops further to minus 16.1 degrees Celsius, but she refuses to give up. She uses some of her clothes, and duct tape to wrap her hands and feet to keep them from freezing. As Millie is huddled in the corner, she looks up and notices the fans above. Next, she grabs a couple of cardboard boxes, and tries to block the fans. She secures them with duct tape. And then suddenly, Millie's leg becomes trapped beneath a fallen shelf, causing her immense pain. Elsewhere, Niranjan and his friend, Mohan, arrive at the police station, where they meet Satish. A panicked Niranjan reveals that his daughter is missing, but Satish argues she must have run away with her boyfriend, and tells him to contact him first. Niranjan argues that Millie isn't like that, but Satish gives them Samir's address, and rudely orders them to leave. Back to Millie, she painfully removes the cloth from her injured leg, and is horrified to see that it has dislocated and turned blue. Meanwhile, Niranjan and Mohan arrive at Samir's house and meet his mother, who reveals that Samir left for Delhi tonight, as he just got a job there. This worries Niranjan even more, and he repeatedly calls Millie, but there's still no answer. Elsewhere, Millie bravely wedges her foot between two shelves, and manages to fix her dislocated leg. Meanwhile, at home, Hasleen and her husband arrive to meet Niranjan, right when Samir arrives. An enraged Niranjan demands to know where his daughter is, but the poor guy insists he doesn't know anything. It turns out his mother has just informed him about Millie, but Mohan doesn't believe him, and decides to take him to the police station. The scene then returns to Millie, who soon wakes up and is horrified to find a mouse touching her hand. She recoils in fear at first, but eventually begins petting the rat, feeling a small sense of warmth from it. Elsewhere, Satish, who is napping in his vehicle, receives a call from his subordinate, who informs him that Millie's family has arrived with Samir, but she isn't with them. Meanwhile, Millie wraps her legs with tape, and uses pieces of the cardboard boxes to brace her foot. She notices the mouse scavenging a box of food in the corner, and eats what's inside. Millie then grabs a metal rod, and starts prying at the fan with all her strength, while Niranjan and others frantically search the town for her. Here, she manages to break through the outer guard, and attempts to jam the rod into the fan, but it doesn't work. Soon, Millie notices smoke filling the room, and finds it difficult to breathe, prompting her to extinguish the small fire. She then comes up with an idea, and gathers all the cardboard boxes to construct a small makeshift tent for herself. She crawls inside with the mouse, and uses the lighter to generate a little extra warmth. Elsewhere, Niranjan and the others return to the police station, where Satish has finally arrived. Samir urges the police to track Millie's phone to locate her last location, but the lousy officer is in no mood to investigate. Suddenly, he pulls Samir aside, and asks him to be honest about what he did to the girl. Samir insists that he hasn't done anything, and when the officer grows aggressive, Niranjan intervenes and begins arguing with him. Amid the chaos, a senior officer named Ravi arrives, so Niranjan explains how Officer Satish has been negligent in locating his missing daughter despite their repeated pleas. Furious, Ravi immediately scolds Satish, and emphasizes that the girl could be in grave danger. He orders Satish to contact the cyber unit to track the phone, and to report back to him immediately with any updates. Afterward, Niranjan explains everything to Ravi in detail, prompting the officer to call the restaurant manager. Sudhir once again insists that Millie wasn't there when he left, and provides the attendance sheets, which they will carefully examine. Here, Samir suddenly mentions an auto driver who used to bother her, so the group decides to head to the mall area to track him down. Meanwhile, Millie looks for the mouse, and is sad to see that the little animal has died, leaving her heartbroken. Elsewhere, in the car, Samir recalls the attendance sheet, and notices something very odd. According to Ladu, Millie was still in the restaurant when he left, but the sheet shows that she punched out before him. The stunned guy quickly gets out of the car, and borrows one of his friend's bikes to head over to see Ladu. He urges his friend to go with Niranjan and the officers to track down the auto driver. Back in the freezer, it seems that Millie may not survive much longer, and she desperately throws whatever food she can at the fan to stop it, but her efforts fail. Meanwhile, at the station, Satish receives a call, reporting that Millie's last location has been tracked, so he asks for the location to be sent on WhatsApp. But upon receiving the text, he ignores the message, and starts watching YouTube videos, leaving his subordinate increasingly worried. Meanwhile, in the freezer, Millie has completely wrapped herself in plastic, and is still throwing meat at the fan. Elsewhere, Officer Ravi tracks down the auto driver who used to bother Millie, but the man insists he knows nothing about her, and other drivers back up his claim. At the same time, Millie successfully manages to stop one of the fans by throwing the food, giving her a small moment of relief. On the other hand, Samir finally finds Ladu, and asks why his punch-out is after Millie's, if she was still there when he left, so the guy reveals that she was about to leave, but they asked her to put some boxes in the freezer because they were in a hurry. Panicked, Samir immediately calls his friend to explain about the shop's freezer, but his phone shuts down due to low battery before his friend can hear his words. With no time to lose, Samir rushes to the mall himself. But in his reckless haste, elsewhere, the cops review the CCTV footage of the entire area, but Millie is nowhere in sight. It turns out Sudhir is also ignoring their calls, and since he lives nearby, Ravi decides to head there personally. Back to Millie, she desperately throws meat at another fan, but she has become extremely weak and is barely able to move. Meanwhile, at the station, the subordinate urges Satish to send the location to Officer Ravi, but he stubbornly refuses, as he's upset over being scolded earlier. The subordinate warns that the girl could be in grave danger, but Satish says the girl's life means nothing to him. Meanwhile, an inmate overhears everything, and decides to intervene by violently attacking another prisoner. This forces Satish to rush into the cell, and brutally beat the troublemaker. The subordinate takes advantage of this distraction and then snoops into his boss's cell phone. Upon discovering the location, he immediately calls Officer Ravi and urgently relays the update. In the meantime, we see an unconscious Samir being brought back to his senses by the car owner. The concerned man asks if he needs help, but Samir only pleads with him to take him to the mall. At the same time, the officers arrive at the mall, and begin frantically searching for Millie, who is shown in a dazed, half-conscious state. Ravi and his team head straight to Dune's kitchen, but to their shock, Sudhir is still on his way, and without him, they have no keys to open the doors. Meanwhile, the freezer temperature has plummeted to -18. Here, Millie musters the last of her strength, and uses her hair clip to unscrew the bolts of a vent on the wall. She removes all 4 bolts one by one, and discovers a network of pipes behind them. With what little energy she has left, she begins banging on it, desperately hoping that someone will hear them. On the other side, Niranjan hears the noises, and soon after, an unconscious Millie drops the tray, and the tray reaches her father, right when Samir also arrives. In the end, Sudhir finally shows up and opens the restaurant door. They immediately rush to the freezer and find Millie unconscious, teetering on the verge of death. Samir wraps her in a blanket to keep her warm, but she remains completely unresponsive. Both men break down in tears, but in an unexpected twist, Millie moves her lips, after which they quickly rush her to the hospital. In the next scene, a doctor informs Niranjan and the others that Millie had developed some complications, but fortunately, she was brought to the hospital before hypothermia could fully set in. He is astounded that she survived for 5 hours in a room with a temperature of -17 degrees Celsius, all while wearing only normal clothes. Meanwhile, Officer Ravi scolds Sudhir for failing to install a safety alarm in the freezer. Just then, Ravi gets a call from Satish, who says the cyber unit has managed to find the last location of the girl. This enrages Ravi, who lashes out at him for delaying the information, and warns that he will face severe punishment later. In the final scene, Millie finally comes to her senses. She immediately asks her father if he took his medication, and worries upon seeing Samir's injury from the accident. They calm her down, and she is relieved to see her father and Samir finally bonding together. Here Millie declares that she has decided to abandon her plans for Canada and stay here. Niranjan warns her to think carefully, reminding her that the salary here isn't as high as in Canada. But Millie no longer seems to care, as what matters most now is being with the people she loves. Okay guys, thanks for watching. See you again in the next video.